Want to know why? Ask how. Howard, the humongous. We have a request from TJK, the amazing atheist, to give you a little something on the origin of Islam. Well, that's a big subject and not easy to compress into 6 or 7 minutes. But let's take a look at what's going on in the world right now. We've had an Arab Spring that's been going on for 2 years. The results are not at all what would please you and me. We all thought that the Twitter and Facebook generation, the nice secular people like you and me, were getting up off of their hind ends and using their cell phones and bringing a revolution of rationalism to the Middle East. Well, it hasn't worked out that way. The irrational folks, the Islamists as they're called, have been taking control. And in Egypt, we don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. We've had a military coup that has installed a secular government, and we have the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist group, out in the street with huge demonstrations, not as big as the demonstrations that got rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, but huge and very persistent demonstrations. And right now we have no idea of what's going to happen next. Meantime, Al-Qaeda has got us by the balls so badly that this weekend, the administration, the Obama administration, has shut down a whole bunch of embassies in the Middle East and has told us to watch out for our travel plans because Al-Qaeda is planning something really big. And this is the first time that we've allowed an Al-Qaeda threat, just a threat, to shut us down. Now, if you were running Al-Qaeda, think what a great victory that would be. All you've had to do is create the impression of a threat, and you can shut a good part of America down. What a cheap victory! You don't lose a life, you scarcely spend a cent. That's terrific. So what is this force we are fighting? Why are things in the streets of Egypt very different than you and I believe they are? Because of the history of Islam. I want to tell you 2 stories. The jihadists are portrayed to us as extremists. And the people like you and me, the people who are my friends in the Muslim community, the pluralists, the tolerant folks, the modernists, the secularists, are portrayed as the real Muslims. No, it's the other way around. In Islam, you are only righteous and proper if you follow in the footsteps of Muhammad himself. If you behave the way the Prophet behaved, if you follow in the step of every act that he took. What did the Prophet do? He invented what we call Islamic extremism. He invented what we call extremist militancy. There are many stories we could get into because, in the words of Osama bin Laden, who knew his history, especially his history of Muhammad, Muhammad was not a prophet of peace. No one would ever accuse a Muslim prophet of being a prophet of peace. The Ayatollah Khomeini, one of the greatest experts on Islam ever, and one of the most influential men in the Middle East today, influential even after he's dead, the way George Washington or Thomas Jefferson are still influential in the United States of America, said, "Our prophets did not turn the other cheek. That is unholy. That is a lie of those Christian barbarians. Our prophets, our great men, were willing to kill and be killed." And he really meant kill, because Muhammad had killed somebody. But one of Muhammad's great moments came in his second battle. His first battle, he had run away from his hometown, Mecca, because he'd been preaching his new religion. And it threatened to upset the economy. So the elders of the town were not too happy with him. And he was afraid they were about to kill him. So he ran off to a town about 200 miles away called Medina. And he had a problem. He ran off with all of his followers. Now, admittedly, his wife was the wealthiest person in all of Mecca. She had more money than all of the men of Mecca combined. She was an incredibly successful transport business operator. She operated camel caravans, taking goods that came in from Yemen, that is, goods that came in from Africa, India, and China, and carrying them over to the Mediterranean, carrying them over to Syria, and she made a fortune. So Muhammad, who was a younger man, sort of a gigolo. I mean, she was 40 years old. He was 25 years old when they got married. Muhammad didn't have to work a lot, and he had a lot of spare time to have strange visions, which he had, and then to preach about them, which he did. So it looked like the Meccans were going to kill him, and he ran off to Medina, and he had a problem. Here he showed up with all of his followers and his wife's money, and he and his group were put up as guests by the local inhabitants. So there's only so long you can be a guest before people get really antsy about having you eating their food and taking up space in their homes. So how was Muhammad going to stay welcome in Medina? Well, his wife's money was only going to last so long, no matter how big a fortune it was. She was out of the caravan business now. They were in Medina, another town. He organized the citizens of Medina to go out and guess what? To raid the caravans of the people of Mecca. The caravans he knew so well because he'd grown up in that business and his wife was in that business. They raided, they robbed, they got goods, and it made the people of Medina rich. And every time you made the people whose homes you were living in rich, it made you look good, and they were happy to have you around. Remember, in those days, if you managed to simply rob one set of clothes off of somebody, the value of a set of clothes was so high that you could use it to buy an entire farm. It took you from a wealthy man to a poor man overnight. The folks back home in Mecca got tired of this. They called Muhammad the highway robber. And they were tired of highway robbery. So they organized a small army, and they went off to Medina to exterminate this pest. They had a small problem. They lost the battle. And Muhammad, in addition to exterminating a lot of the most distinguished men of Mecca in this battle, was not a pleasant man. He didn't just treat the bodies with respect and bury them. He took them and he dumped them into a well, which was a sign of severe disrespect. It was basically saying, fuck you, to the Meccans. Well, the Meccans didn't take to this very kindly. They decided instead of just sending off a raiding party, next year they would send an entire army. Why next year? Because they had to wait for the season of war to come. During the rest of the year, they had to take care of their normal business. This gave Muhammad a lot of notice that they were coming. And he didn't know what to do. So he consulted with one of his followers, a Persian, who said, well, we have this strategy in Persia. We build a great big deep trench. And then when men try to get at us across the trench, while they're climbing down the other side, we can pick them off like flies. So Muhammad did that. The trench was all ready by the time the Meccan army showed up. The Meccan army two or three men tried to get across the trench. It didn't work. They were picked off before they could get more than 5 or 6 feet. And the Meccans hunkered down to starve Muhammad and his followers out. It was sort of working until one day a hurricane came up, a sandstorm. A sandstorm so powerful that it knocked over the tents and picked up the cooking pots. Can you imagine a cooking pot made of wrought iron being picked up and bowled around by the wind? And the Meccans got disgusted. Their leader stood up in the middle of the sandstorm, kicked his camel from a sit-down position into a stand, and galloped off. All the rest of the men galloped off with him. Muhammad's stuck with a problem. He's just won his second battle. But he has no way to pay off the people of Medina who've got to be disgusted that they've had to go through near starvation in order just to cling to life. Muhammad needs to pay the people he's staying with off somehow. Now, he's really been paying people off with 2 things. Not just the booty, not just the loot. He's been paying them off with the glory, the glamour, the feeling that they've really stomped on somebody else. So Muhammad According to Muhammad's version of the story, Muhammad is on his way back to one of his wives' houses. He's about to start washing up in one of his wives' houses. And the angel Gabriel, who delivers all of his messages from God, comes to him and says, don't even take your armor off. Don't even clean up your face. Get your men together. I'm sending a bunch of angels, an army of angels with you. There's a Jewish suburb not far from town. Wipe them out. Don't take all their goods. Well, hey, what a great way to reward the people around you. Attack a community of people who are not prepared for war and have no reason to believe that you oppose them in any way. Steal everything that they've got. Hey, you can pay off the people you're living with again. Muhammad did exactly what he was told to do. It was an ethnic expulsion. He didn't kill everybody. He simply beat them. He took all of their goods. He allowed them to take what they could carry on their camels. You can imagine how many houses you can carry on your camels. And let them gallop away. Battle number 2 for Muhammad. Muhammad's way of doing things. Ethnic cleansing, we call it today. War crime is what we call it today. Then came battle number 3. The Meccans were not finished yet. They really needed to get rid of this pest, this parasite. So they sent an army back for battle number 3. Battle number 3 was the Battle of Uhud. Battle number 3 took place in front of a mountain. In other words, Muhammad positioned a mountain behind him to protect his back. But he had a problem. The mountains in this Arabian Peninsula are more like molehills for us. They're big hills. And the mountain wasn't just a mountain, it was 2 hills. And there was a pass. So Muhammad positioned 50 men at the pass to hold his back. Good idea, right? Good strategy. And Muhammad was so successful as a war leader that he utterly defeated the Meccans. Now again, Muhammad's paying off all of his forces with loot. He's paying them all off with booty. If you can take the clothes and armor from just one dead body, you are set for life. Remember, the clothes alone will make you a wealthy man. Think of the cost of the armor. Muhammad's men had descended on the dead bodies and were busy stripping them clean. And the guys up in the pass, the archers protecting their back, saw this and thought, oh my God, if we don't get down there fast, there's going to be nothing left for us. We've come into this as poor men. We're going to go out of this as poor men. So they abandoned their positions in the pass and they ran down to the battlefield. The Meccans weren't stupid. They may have been defeated, but they weren't stupid. They circled around one of the hills and they came upon Muhammad and his troops from behind. And this time they drove them off the battlefield. Muhammad's men abandoned him. It was a miracle he survived. In one case, he was being charged by a Meccan who was sure that he was finally going to get this leader for good, and Muhammad picked up a lance and speared the man in the neck. Thus, definitely doing what the Ayatollah Khomeini said. He was willing to kill. This wound was fatal. Muhammad came up. He had a problem. How do you make sure your men never abandon you on the battlefield again? How do you make sure your men never abandoned the battlefield again? Here was Muhammad's solution. The idea of heaven and hell already existed. It probably came from the Persians, the Zoroastrians. The Christians had picked it up and run with it. The problem was the Christian heaven was the most boring heaven you have ever heard of in your life. Yes, it had a lot of singing of praises of God. Yes, there was a lot of gold and rubies and pearls, but it was missing excitement. What could it possibly be missing? Muhammad came up with the answer: sex. Muhammad offered you, if you stood on the battlefield, first of all, if you never fought on behalf of Islam, if you never killed on behalf of Islam, if you never made war on behalf of Islam, if you never made jihad on behalf of Islam, you would go to hell. And in hell you would be roasted over a spit, screaming every inch of the way until your skin fell off, And then you would be given another skin, so you would be forced to scream your lungs out all over again. And that would go on forever. If you fought, if you killed on behalf of Islam, you would go to paradise. And what was there in paradise, especially if you stood firm? If you fought to the bitter end, if you didn't care about the loot on the ground, if you didn't care about another form of loot, dividing up the wives and female children of the people you had defeated, a very important part of Islam. If you stood to the bitter end, killing the enemy, you went directly to paradise, fast, instantly. And you got those 76 virgins. The figure varies, the number varies from time to time, but the virgins do not. And they would have skin so lustrous that you could see the bones of their shins through the skin of their legs. I have no idea why that's attractive. And they would look at you with dark brown eyes. What does dark brown eyes mean? It means their pupils would dilate with desire for you, which is the sexiest thing on planet Earth. Not just when you can fuck women, but when they want you to do it. Thus, Muhammad came up with a radical new innovation, pussy in paradise. But what did Muhammad do with these three battles? He invented militant Islam. He invented jihadism. And then in 628 AD, a few years later, he added one final touch. He said that God came to him and unrolled the scroll of the earth and said, "The furthest reaches of the east shall be yours. The furthest reaches of the west shall be yours." And under God's orders, Muhammad sent what were called the letters to the emperors. He picked the 6 biggest emperors of his day, the men who ruled the entire world he knew of, and he invited them to Islam. He invited them to adopt the one true religion of the one true God and its one true set of laws with its one true political system and its one true military system. And if they didn't adopt Islam, he would be forced to an unfortunate recourse. He would have to use violence against them. Why? To save the souls of their citizens, to liberate their citizens unto the one truth. In other words, Muhammad turned jihad, something that had been local in the Arabian Peninsula, into a global obligation. Why? Because if you are a good Muslim, and if you know there is only one God, if you know there is only one prophet, if you know there is only one law that comes from God himself, Sharia, isn't it your obligation to liberate all of humanity? It is not a modern aberration caused by poverty that we have Islamic extremism. Islamic extremism was invented by Muhammad. The aberration is Muslim moderation, and long may that moderation, liberalism, tolerance, and pluralism grow. Haven't we done a lot of these stories before?